On November 8, 1988, Brandy Hutchins, a 14-year-old beloved daughter, told her friends and family that she was pregnant with her boyfriend's child. Tragically, just 4 days later, she was discovered murdered in the root cellar of an abandoned house in Coal Hill, Arkansas. During the police investigation at the house, they found a piece of paper with a positive pregnancy test result next to Brandy's body. However, when Brandy's autopsy results came back, they revealed that she was not pregnant and had never been. It turned out that Brandy had not been honest about her pregnancy. After learning this, the police suspected that the fake positive pregnancy test might have played a role in her death. They focused their attention on 2 suspects, including Brandy's boyfriend, but unfortunately, they never found enough evidence to make an arrest. It's been more than 35 years since Brandy was killed, and investigators are still searching for answers. Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give you my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. Okay, so Brandy Hutchins. There's good news and bad news about this case. The good news is we talk a lot about windows of opportunity, and the window in which Brandy could have been killed is a pretty small window. Yes, it took a couple days to find her, but the area in which this all went down, the suspect pool's pretty small. That's a good thing. The idea that this would have been a transient or just some outside party, highly unlikely. Whoever did this is from the area. And depending on how you interpret the evidence that was found with Brandy, you may come to the conclusion that whatever happened to her happened relatively soon after the last time she was seen alive. And I will tell you, this is one of those cases where you're probably going to leave this episode saying, okay, I'm pretty sure I know who did it. Why haven't they been arrested? Well, we're going to try to break that down tonight and we're going to talk about it at the end. But this is one of those situations where it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So with that out of the way, let's dive into this week's case. Brandy Dawn Hutchins was born on November 5th, 1974 in Arkansas. She was the only child of Jerry and Mary Hutchins. We had the pleasure of speaking with Brandy's cousin Julie for this episode. Julie's mom and Brandy's dad are siblings, so she'll be weighing in on this case throughout the episode.
Brandy and I were always pretty close. I think it was more like an aunt-niece relationship because I was so much older than her. I was 9 years old when Brandy was born, and I've always, still to this day, loved babies and small children. And I hadn't ever been around babies very much. When she was born, she was really the first one I was ever around a lot. So, of course, I fell immediately in love with Brandy and always felt the need to take care of her. It was like I had my own baby doll, real life baby doll.
Julie described Brandy as a bubbly and happy child who can make friends with anyone.
She was also a very giving child, like at Christmas when they would come for Christmas or whatever. She would always bring some little something for everybody. It was usually something she had pulled out of her own toy box or something like that, but which was so sweet. She was giving, she was bubbly, she was happy, she was funny. She was really funny. She was always making jokes, and she never met a stranger. She could make a friend out of anybody.
Unfortunately, Brandy had a bad childhood. Mary was the disciplinarian, and the discipline was not consistent. At times, she would treat Brandy like a princess, and other times she would treat her like she didn't even want her around. Julie is sure Brandy went through her childhood not knowing what to expect from her mother. This caused a lot of emotional turmoil in Brandy, which she would carry with her until her death. Because of this, Julie always felt really protective over Brandy, but she wasn't old enough to say anything. Around 1984, Brandy and her parents relocated from Arkansas to Iowa. Within a few months, Mary met another man. She told Jerry that she wanted a divorce and she couldn't handle Brandy anymore. He would have to take care of her. Mary then told Brandy she was heading to the store and would be home soon. However, that was a lie. She never came back. So Jerry and Brandy went back to Arkansas, and while they were there, Brandy kept in touch with her mom on the phone, but she still felt abandoned. Brandy and her dad ended up staying in a 2-bedroom home with Jerry's 2 brothers, which obviously wasn't great for Brandy. Not only was she abandoned by her mom, but she also had to live with 3 grown men without having her own space. Julie believes that Brandy was likely very confused and unsure what would happen next. Brandy had always been strong-willed, and this became even more evident while staying with her dad and her uncles. She acted out and was determined to have things her way. Julie now thinks that Brandy may have had oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD, which Johns Hopkins describes as a type of behavioral disorder. Children with ODD are uncooperative, defiant, and hostile toward peers, parents, teachers, and other authority figures.
I definitely think that in today's world, Brandy would have probably been diagnosed as having ODD. And now they offer so much help for that. Of course, there's medication, but there's also therapy, and schools can do so much more. They have different programs for kids with issues like that. And I just think it's so sad that people just labeled her as being a troubled child and a mean child and didn't give her half a chance. They just thought that she'd done everything she'd done on purpose. And I think that it was a struggle with her. She tried so hard to be a good person, but something inside of her just wouldn't let her.
Julie said Brandy showed signs of ODD even before her mom left, but her behavior got worse after. However, at that time, nobody connected her behavior with her mom abandoning her. They simply saw her as a troublesome child who needed to go away. Despite the challenges, Brandy and her dad shared a strong bond, and he loved her deeply.
Of course, they would argue some whenever she was wanting something. He didn't want her to do it or whatever. But other than that, they got along good. I never seen them get into a serious fight or anything like that. They would joke around and stuff.
Because Brandy was in cramped conditions while staying with her dad and uncles, she began bouncing around from one friend's house to the next. That would last until she wore out her welcome, then she'd go back home for a few days and stay with her dad before moving on to the next friend's house. Julie hated seeing the instability in Brandy's life. She thought that if Brandy had a decent home and someone to love and care for her, her acting out would stop and she could live a normal life. So Julie and her husband decided to open their home to Brandy. While Brandy stayed with Julie, they had a great time. In fact, 2 of Julie's favorite memories came from when Brandy was living with her.
One night, we were sitting there and she picked up my son's play telephone, and she was acting like she was talking to a boy on the phone. And she said, "Oh no, I can't go out tonight. I have to wash my hair." And then she says, "Tomorrow night? Oh no, I can't go tomorrow night either. I've got to dry my hair." For some reason, I just thought that was so funny because it was like, well, your hair would be dry by tomorrow night. And then while she was living with us, she was riding her bicycle around the block. And she came back and she told me that she had a wreck and fell over in the ditch. And she said, "I think something bit me." And she showed me her ankle. Thought, oh my goodness, it looks like a snake bite. And so I loaded her up and took her to the hospital, and they said it was actually a snake bite, but it either didn't inject any venom or it wasn't poisonous because it was do anything to her. And so I always teased her from then on that she was so mean that a snake couldn't even hurt her. That was always a joke between she and I, too.
While Julie and Brandy got along well, Brandy was still a very strong-willed child, and when she figured out that she was going to have to follow the rules that Julie and her husband set for her, she decided she wanted to go back to her dad's. Julie thinks that Brandy knew she could wear him down and end up getting her way when she wanted something. After moving back in with her dad, Brandy continued bouncing around from home to home. It wasn't unusual for her to be gone several days at a time, and because of this, Julie found herself seeing Brandy less often. In September of 1988, 13-year-old Brandy met a new friend at a local fair who I'm going to call Anna. She also met Anna's brother, who was 17 at the time. Now, the police haven't publicly named the brother, so I will call him Mike for this episode, but just to be clear, that is not his real name. Mike flirted with Brandy, and he showed her the attention and affection that she had been longing for. Because of this, she developed a huge crush on Mike and would often go to Anna's house under the pretense of spending time with her, but she was really going there to be closer to Mike. At some point, Brandy and Mike started having a sexual relationship. This left Brandy believing that they were boyfriend and girlfriend, but Mike didn't see it that way. Then on November 5th, Brandy turned 14 years old. 3 days later, she told her dad that she was pregnant with Mike's baby. She asked if he would give her permission to marry Mike, but he refused. Brandy said that was fine. She and Mike would just go to Iowa so her mom could give her consent. Now, even up to this day, Julie isn't quite sure why Brandy thought that Mike would marry her in the first place.
I really don't have that part of it figured out because she had to have known that did not feel the same way about her. So I don't understand why she was telling her dad, thinking that maybe she thought that if she told she was pregnant and said, well, we have to go to Iowa to have my mom sign papers or whatever, then he would do that. She must have really thought that he would marry her if he thought she was pregnant. She wanted to be loved, that she wanted to be accepted, and she would have done anything, I think, to be loved and accepted because she didn't really feel that love and acceptance at home, especially after her mom abandoned her.
In addition to telling her dad she was pregnant, Brandy also started to share the news with several friends. While doing so, she said, quote, "When my boyfriend finds out, he's going to kill me." Of course, Brandy didn't think that would actually happen, but here we are covering this story. On November 9th, Brandy told her dad about a birthday party that some friends were throwing for her and Anna the following day. When Jerry asked for more details, Brandy admitted she didn't know which friends were organizing the event. Now, it's important to note that the host of this event remained unidentified to this day, though it's speculated that it was likely Mike and/or his family who invited Brandy. Brandy also told her dad that the party was going to be held at an abandoned house located on Whippoorwill Road in Coal Hill. The house was known as Old John Emery's house, and it was located on a hill very close to Mike's place. We did ask Julie about the Old John Emery house as well.
Apparently, that's just the guy that at one time owned it or built it or whatever, but it was nothing really more than a shack. But I guess the neighborhood kids partied there. There were devil worshiping signs written on the inside of the walls, on the inside of the house. I didn't know anything about it until after all this happened, but I've heard that that's where kids went to party and drink and smoke pot and stuff like that.
Now, when Brandy asked her father to go to the party, he initially said no, but despite this, she kept asking until he finally said yes. On November 10th, Brandy spent most of the day sitting in her room writing a letter to Mike, likely to say she was pregnant. Now, Julie thinks Brandy planned on giving the letter to Mike at the party. In the late afternoon, Jerry and Brandy left home so they could drop her off at the party. They stopped on the way and Brandy bought a pack of cigarettes, which minors could do at the time. At around 4:30 p.m., Jerry dropped Brandy off at the Old John Emery house. He drove her about halfway up the hill, and before she exited the vehicle, she gave him a kiss and told him she loved him. That was the last time he ever saw his daughter. Jerry later told the Associated Press that Brandy said that she and Mike were going to Iowa after the party so that Brandy's mom could give her consent to marry. Then when they got back from Iowa, Brandy planned to spend the weekend with Mike's family. So when Brandy didn't return home that night after the party, Jerry wasn't concerned. 2 days later, on November 12th, a group of hunters were out searching for their lost hunting dogs when they stumbled upon the Old John Emery house. As they stepped on the porch, they looked down and caught sight of an 11x14 root cellar beneath the home. They spotted a purse and a bag, so they looked a little closer and also noticed a shoe. When they walked down into the cellar, they saw a human leg, so they left and called police. After officers arrived, they found the fully clothed body of 14-year-old Brandy Hutchins in the cellar. Someone had thrown boards on top of her body in order to hide her. Brandy had a point-blank gunshot wound above her right eye from a .22 caliber bullet. There were no signs of a struggle. According to some articles, there was evidence that Julie was killed in the cellar. However, Julie said a detective told her that he doesn't believe she was killed there. She was killed somewhere else and then brought there after. Now, in addition to finding Brandy, officers looked around the cellar and found papers by Brandy's body that revealed a positive pregnancy test. There was also a post-it note that read, quote, "Meet me at the house." Investigators later conducted a handwriting analysis on the note, but they were unable to conclude any results. To this day, Julie still doesn't know if someone gave Brandy that note to lure her to the old John Emery house, or if Brandy wrote the note herself and was planning to give it to Mike so that he would meet her there. Obviously a critical piece of information, but at this point we just don't know. Now, according to Brandy's father, the police also found Brandy's empty cigarette pack at the scene, and this is interesting to me and one of the more perplexing pieces of information about this case, because if it's accurate, as I mentioned earlier in this story, Brandy had picked up those cigarettes right before arriving at the old John Emery house. So I know now I'm not a smoker, but I looked it up and it looks like there's 20 cigarettes in a pack. So where did all the cigarettes go? And did it happen over a short period of time? Did it happen over that 2-day span? And even more importantly, 20 cigarettes. I don't know how much she was smoking, but how many people was she with? Was it one other person? Was it 2 other people? Either way, it does appear on the surface, at least, that at some point, Brandy was with other people and more than likely they were smoking that pack of cigarettes. The Associated Press also reported that on the walls of the house, officers discovered satanic writings, including a pentagram, the number 666, and the initials KKK. They also found the word red rum, which is obviously murder spelled backwards, and that was written on the walls and the mirrors. Hanging from the rafters, they located rope and wire, which led them to believe that animals had been sacrificed there at some point. Now, on the surface, it seemed like there was a possible satanic element to Brandy's murder, which would play a major role in the media's reporting of this case. Now, after looking over the scene, officers went to Jerry's house to let him know that Brandy had been murdered. Jerry was forthcoming about Brandy's pregnancy and how he had dropped her off at the party. Now, the police did investigate this supposed party, but they were never able to confirm if it was actually planned for the evening of the 10th. And it is worth noting that Jerry was initially considered a suspect, but he was eventually ruled out. And I don't know why he was ruled out, but I'm assuming it was based on some sort of alibi, maybe a place that he went after dropping Brandy off where his whereabouts could be accounted for. And obviously, Jerry's much older now. He's in his 80s. So I'm never going to go out there and accuse a parent of potentially killing their child. But I will say, from an objective investigative point of view, you always want to start with the last person to see your victim alive. Because again, you're going off their narrative, and if they're lying to you, it's going to throw off your whole investigation. So I'm sure they went back and they started with Jerry and were able to trace his whereabouts and maybe confirm through independent parties that they had seen him shortly after 4:30, which would have cleared him. So that's probably how they came to that conclusion. But just to be transparent with you guys, I do not have that information to confirm that. We're going to keep going with this case, but before we do, let's take our first break. One in 5 Americans have learn a new language on their bucket list. If that sounds like you, make 2024 the year you finally check it off your list with Babbel. Be a better you this year with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. It's designed by real people for real conversations with tips and tools that are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. Plus, Babbel's speech recognition technology helps you improve your pronunciation and accent as well. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove that Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold, plus Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are all backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. So here's a special limited-time deal for my listeners and viewers. Right now, you can get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for you guys at babbel.com/detective. Once again, get 55% off at babbel.com/detective, and that's spelled BABBEL.com/detective. Rules and restrictions may apply. Now, knowing that Brandy was supposedly pregnant with Mike's baby, the police went to speak with him as well. Mike claimed that he and Brandy were not in a relationship despite what she believed. And unfortunately, this was pretty much all that Mike said to the police. He has never provided a full statement as far as Julie knows. Now, while police were conducting additional interviews, Brandy's body was undergoing an autopsy. And during that examination, the medical examiner determined that Brandy didn't die instantly after being shot. She actually survived for around 15 minutes. The ME also discovered that Brandy wasn't pregnant, and in fact, she had never been pregnant before. This left both the police and Brandy's family with even more questions. How did Brandy end up with a positive pregnancy test, and why did she claim to be pregnant when she wasn't? On November 14th, 2 days after Brandy was found dead, Sheriff Eddie King told the media that he needed the public's help in finding out more information about her killer or killers. When he was asked if satanic rituals were involved in Brandy's murder, he said, quote, "At this time, I wouldn't rule out anything. I wouldn't say that it is, but I wouldn't rule out anything." The next day, Sheriff King was asked again about the satanic element, and he told the Associated Press that he hadn't been able to rule it out yet. He said, quote, "From all indications we're getting, it could be. A lot of people have been giving us information that would tend to lead you to believe that it is involved." King further said that they had suspects, but no arrests had been made. He explained that the suspects were a group of kids who had been involved in satanic rituals. They had been identified through physical evidence found at the house and through information supplied to police. On November 16th, Mike's mother Jamie spoke to the media about the old John Emery house, which, as I mentioned earlier, was located near her house. Now, she said it was preposterous to think that it had been used for satanic rituals. In her opinion, it was only used by kids who wanted to drink and do drugs. Jamie went on to admit that she knew Brandy, although she didn't admit that her son was having a sexual relationship with her. Jamie explained that she had met Brandy approximately 4 months before her murder, and that she had sympathized with Brandy and allowed her to stay in her home at times because she, quote, felt sorry for her. Now, Julie finds this interview very interesting. Here she is explaining more.
So the Arkansas Gazette, which is the newspaper out of Little Rock, came down to the sheriff's office. This was on a Tuesday after Brandy's body had been found on Saturday. They came down and stopped at the sheriff's office and got a deputy to go with them and show them where the abandoned house was where Brandy's body was found, because they wanted to take some pictures and do an article about it. When they got out there, Jamie was there looking around the house, and they said that there was a trail going from the abandoned house back to house. So they had ridden their 3-wheeler there back and forth several times. So they said that it was a place where kids partied. I don't know. I have not yet been able to find anybody that has partied at that house or will admit to it. So I thought that was kind of strange that she was at that house after that had happened. And I don't know. Of course, a lot of people went to that house. My mom and dad went there just to see. I was never there, but I just thought it was strange. But that's why they were interviewing Jamie, simply because she was there. When she said in this interview that she felt sorry for her and she would try to give her some stability and this and that. And I'm sorry, Jamie told Brandy the last time that Brandy was at her house that if she ever came back, she would kill her.
Now, just to put a pin on what Julie just said there, she's not exactly sure what the argument between Jamie and Brandy would have even been about. Now, I know I just spent some time on it, but by November 18th, the police no longer thought that satanic rituals were connected to Brandy's murder. Sheriff King told the Associated Press that while they believe satanic rituals were performed in the house by people who dabbled in devil worship, Brandy's murder was, quote, not a ritual killing. King also revealed that the police were, quote, on the verge of making an arrest, and he added that Brandy's false pregnancy test may have contributed to her death. Now, after the satanic ritual angle was ruled out in Brandy's murder, there were very few updates from the media. Within a few months, the old Emery house was lit on fire and destroyed, and Mike and his family had moved out of state. The next update came in January of 1989 when the Commercial Appeal reported that the police had narrowed down their list of suspects to 2 people. But no arrests were made, and Julie said several people had been questioned and given polygraphs. However, the investigation went nowhere. The police simply did not have enough evidence to make an arrest. Now, according to Julie, the 2 suspects were Mike and his friend who lived close by, but Mike was the main suspect out of the 2.
He was the main suspect. I've had the prosecutor, the deputy prosecutor, the sheriff, the special investigator with the state police, the detective that works her case now, and like 3 other detectives tell me that they're sure he's the one that done it. The prosecutor says there's not enough evidence. The prosecutor at one time said that he wanted the weapon before he would issue an arrest warrant. But I've had 2 detectives tell me that even if he had the weapon, they couldn't get ballistics off of it because the type of gun it was or whatever. I don't understand all that, but they couldn't get ballistics off of it to prove that that was the murder weapon anyway.
Now, as far as the ballistics, they did come out and say that it was a .22 caliber bullet that killed Brandy, so I'm thinking they may have recovered the projectile from her body during the autopsy. That being said, yes, could they make a direct connection to a specific gun just by the projectile, especially back then? Probably not. However, I still think it would be a critical piece of information to find out that Mike or one of the other suspects or a family member of theirs or a friend owned a .22 caliber handgun. Yes, is it going to be the quote-unquote smoking gun, literally? No, probably not. But just for the sake of information and building a case based on totality, if you were able to connect Mike or his friend to a .22 caliber pistol or revolver, I think that would obviously help the case. So that brings us back to Julie, and based on everything she's been able to put together, she believes she has an idea of what happened to Brandy. So according to Julie, if her theory's right, on November 10th, Jerry dropped Brandy off at the old John Emery house, but no one was there. So Brandy walked to Mike's house, which was nearby, and once Brandy got to Mike's, Julie isn't quite sure what happened then, but whatever it wasn't good.
I don't know if his mom said, "What are you doing here?" Because his mom had told Brandy, "If you ever come back to my house, I'll kill you," because they'd gotten into an argument the time before. So anyway, I think she walked to my house, told maybe and his mom, "I'm pregnant, we got to get married," whatever, showed him the test, and I don't know. And that's when things went real bad. So I don't know exactly how it happened. I don't know if she told and then told his mom, or if his mom was there and Brandy told them both, or what. I don't know. And I could be totally wrong. That's just dwelt on it, and that's just the most logical thing I could come up with.
Now, another important note to make, Julie told us that Brandy weighed over 200 pounds. So it's very likely that whoever killed her, they needed help to move her body to the cellar if she wasn't killed there. And that's where Mike's friend comes into play. And what's interesting is Julie actually reached out to the friend, but he swears he doesn't know anything.
He swears to me, no, he doesn't know anything about it. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he has told 2 different detectives that if the prosecutor would grant him immunity, then he would tell them everything that they wanted to know.
Now, despite having 2 suspects, Brandy's case went cold. Then in 2008, new physical evidence surfaced, although we don't know exactly what that evidence was. Now, this evidence was sent to the state crime lab and more people were questioned, but again, nothing happened. We're going to take our final break and we'll be right back. With HelloFresh, you get farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Ditch the meal planning woes and dive into HelloFresh's biggest menu yet with over 45 recipes and even more market items to choose from every single week. Make restaurant-quality meals at home without the high cost of takeout. Plus, HelloFresh's new Ready in 20 recipes are on the table in just 20 minutes, and if you really think about it, that's quicker than delivery. And HelloFresh's pre-portioned ingredients help reduce food waste by up to 45% compared to grocery shopping. And by the way, when you sign up today, you'll unlock a free dessert for life. So satisfy your sweet tooth with a dessert of your choice in every HelloFresh box for free. Guys, I've been talking about HelloFresh for a while, and I can sit here and tell you how good it tastes or how easy it is to make the meals. But for me, the real X factor is that time I get back with my kids. The ability to cook them something that I know is good for them and have them participate while we're making it, it creates memories. Just like a lot of parents out there, you don't have a lot of time after school. There's homework, there's showers, there's bathtubs, and then it's bedtime. So usually you're going to order something in or make something quick. This allows me to cook something that I know is good for them, but also create those memories where they get to participate and feel like they're part of the process. And I'll tell you this, when they make the food, they're more likely to eat it, which is a game changer for me because it's hard to get my little one to eat. So if you want to check out HelloFresh, go over to HelloFresh.com/DetectiveSuite for a free dessert for life. That's one dessert item per box while your subscription is active. Once again, that's free dessert for life at HelloFresh.com/DetectiveSuite, and Detective Suite is all one word. Go check them out. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. All right, we're back, and I want to go back to Mike because he found himself at the center of other criminal investigations, including the disappearance of his girlfriend, Michelle Burchell. Now, Mike and Michelle shared a child together, and he had previously assaulted her and threatened to kill her. But I'm not going to go into too much detail here because we plan on covering Michelle's case in a future episode, but here's a quick summary. Michelle was last seen on May 27, 1994 in Bardwell, Kentucky, where her parents lived. It was reported that Michelle was last seen leaving her parents' house with Mike. They were on their way to the doctor because she was pregnant with their second child. But after they left the house, Michelle was never seen again. Her car was left parked at her parents' home, and her purse and car keys were later found burned on a secluded dead-end road off KY 703. Now, Michelle remains missing to this day, leaving her family with a lot of unanswered questions. But Michelle's not the only one connected to Mike. Two other women who were also romantically involved with Mike also died at different points in time. Now, these women have not been publicly named by police and very few details have been released, but what we do know is that both women's deaths were ruled suicides and that Mike was allegedly with at least one of the women when her gunshot-related death occurred. And according to the Hickman County Times, the friends and family of these women say they don't believe they committed suicide. I will tell you it's unclear at this point if these deaths are still being investigated today. So where does all of this leave us with Mike? Well, despite being investigated in Michelle's disappearance, the two possible suicides, and Brandy's murder, he has never been charged with anything or publicly named as a suspect by police. So as the years passed on, Brandy's murder remained cold. But in February of 2020, Julie decided to search for answers on her own, and she started a Facebook page titled Brandy Hutchins, the Disposable Child. Her reasoning behind the name comes from the fact that so many people acted like it was no big deal that Brandy was murdered. It's no great loss, just another troubled child they no longer had to deal with. The page made a lot of people start talking, and Julie was able to speak to several of Brandy's friends and family members that she hung out with during the weeks leading up to her death. Through these conversations, Julie learned that around the time of Brandy's 14th birthday, she stayed at a friend's house for multiple days. This friend, who we're going to call Lydia, was 15 years old. Now here's the interesting part of this story. She was pregnant, and she had recently gotten married. So Lydia, who has never been interviewed by the police, told Julie that while Brandy was staying with her, they came up with a joke to play on Mike. The idea was for Brandy to use some of Lydia's urine, take a pregnancy test, and then tell Mike she was pregnant, so that's what they did. Brandy took Lydia's urine to the Pregnancy Help Center so that she could get proof that she was pregnant. Now that's where she got the positive pregnancy test paperwork, which was eventually found near her body. Now Julie did tell us that she's not sure if Brandy meant for this whole thing to be a joke, or if she really thought that if she told Mike she was pregnant, he would actually marry her. Lydia also shared with Julie that at the same time Brandy was staying with her, someone told Brandy that a few friends were throwing her a birthday party on the 10th. In addition to that, Brandy told Lydia that she was given a small note telling her to meet her friends at the old John Emery house for the party. Now I will say this, Lydia isn't sure where the note came from, and Julie hasn't been able to figure that part out either, but if you're to take this testimony from Lydia at face value, it does explain the post-it that was found near her body suggesting she come up to the house. We have this question as to whether potentially Brandy wrote it for Mike or someone wrote it for her, this does give us a little insight to it if, again, you're to take it at face value. Now, in January of 2023, around 3 years after Julie started the Facebook page, former Sheriff King sat down with the Daily Citizen and spoke about Brandy's case. He revealed that when he was sheriff, he had enough evidence to charge a couple people in Brandy's death, but the prosecutor requested the murder weapon before filing any charges. Prosecutor Jeff Phillips also spoke to the Daily Citizen and explained why charges haven't been filed. He stated, quote, "It's important to remember that it's still an open investigation by law enforcement, so our office has to wait to see if anything breaks or if there's any additional evidence." And obviously, Julie was very frustrated with this prosecutor's response.
We've had, 4 or 5 prosecutors in the last 35 years. None of them have wanted to press charges. They don't want to press charges and then lose the case. That doesn't look good on them. But everyone is so convinced that is the one that killed her that it looks like they would at least try the case. I know that if they do try and he's found innocent, that they can't. I know that they can't try it again. But there's some reason that they believe he's guilty. And I think they need to let a jury decide. He's free. He's been free for 35 years. At least if they tried him, there's a chance that he might have to pay. And if he's not, then big deal. He's been walking free anyway. And in the process, somebody might talk. Somebody might be willing to make a deal. If he didn't do it, then maybe he would be willing to say what really happened.
So I will say I completely agree with Julie here. Jeff Phillips' comments sound like a cop-out to me, and it's something I've definitely heard before. What break are you waiting for at this point? Is there DNA evidence that we're unaware of? This is just to kick the can down the road, in my opinion. And I've personally experienced things like this, which Sheriff King is describing here, where law enforcement feels like they have enough and prosecution gets a hold of it and they start to play defense attorney and they don't want to go forward. And they're basically asking you for things as a detective that you can't provide. If you could, you already would have. And this reminds me a lot of a case that I worked for breaking homicide, Judy Rawlings. Some of you may know that case. Tony Sierra Jr., who's in jail right now for 30 years for child molestation, I believe killed Judy Rawlings. And yet he has never been charged with that crime. And I can't get into all the specifics, but there was things that I thought could have been done or had been done that would have been enough to get to at least get a grand jury. But as far as I know, that's never been done. So again, it's painful from an investigative perspective to have this happen. But what Sheriff King is describing here absolutely happens. Now, Brandy's dad, Jerry, also spoke to the Daily Citizen and said, quote, "I wish I could go back and do it differently, but in the end, I think it was covered up. I have multiple examples of how the police failed, and I don't know if they're still working on this case or not. They don't ever tell me anything. I think I ought to be in the know, but they don't ever tell me anything." Julie told us that she believes the police aren't motivated to solve Brandy's case. They view her as a troubled child and have washed their hands of the whole thing. Julie went on to say that she'll be the first to tell you that Brandy was no angel.
But let's remember, Brandy was only 14 years old. She had just turned 14 years old. Brandy's home life was very unstable. Brandy was like any other child and needed what every other child needs: love, acceptance, and stability. Brandy would do whatever she needed to do or go wherever she needed to go to get that love and acceptance. Unfortunately, that put her in a lot of bad situations. She was a child that just never had a chance. Back then, there weren't resources available to children the way there are today. If there had been, Brandy might be alive today. Brandy was no angel, but she didn't deserve to die, and the people that killed her need to pay for their crime.
Julie went on to say that as much as the police want to forget about Brandy's murder, she refuses to do so.
Brandy was not a disposable child. She was a child that was loved by several people. The system failed her terribly. Not just the system, but her family as well. I admit that. That's why I have felt so much guilt since her death. I tried with Brandy, but I wish I would have tried harder. The children who are hardest to love are usually the ones that need it the most. We all need to remember that. When you feel like giving up on a child, hang on even tighter. It just might save a life.
So I'm not going to dispute what Julie's saying. This is her personal experience, and she's entitled to her opinion. I will say there are instances where we have a victim who has a troubled past or maybe even a career criminal themselves. We've had multiple incidences where gang members were murdered by other gang members. I can only speak from anecdotal experience, but I can tell you we worked those cases just as hard as any other case because for us, again, we have to remain objective. So we're looking at the facts of the case, and regardless of who the victim is, we're always going to put our best foot forward. For us, it's a challenge. And in many instances, a lot of police departments don't have a lot of murder investigations. So when they get one, they really want to solve it. So again, I don't know these officers personally who have touched this case over the years, but I would like to think that they tried as hard as they could to solve Brandy's murder, but unfortunately, due to some outside circumstances, maybe the prosecutor's office, they were unable to take this one over the finish line. So where does that leave us? Well, today, Brandy's murder still remains unsolved, and Julie still visits Jerry, who just turned 80. Happy birthday, Jerry. Understandably, he's had an extremely hard time knowing he was the one who dropped Brandy off before she was killed.
Brandy's daddy just turned 80 years old last week, and I sure would like to see this solved before he passes away. It needs to be. What would be? I think it would give him some peace, and he wouldn't be in the turmoil that I know he's in. My brother went and visited him a few weeks ago, probably about a month ago, and I mean he doesn't visit with him much, but he said he talked about Brandy the whole time he was there. So he's hurting. He's hurt for so long, and it would be nice to get this solved.
To finish up our interview, we also asked Julie how listeners and viewers can help with Brandy's case.
Follow her page. It's Brandy Hutchins, The Disposable Child. Share the podcast. And if anybody knows anything, of course, come forward. I mean, even if they just let me know, and then I can let the proper people know. But yeah, I mean, just come forward if they know anything at all. Please. It's been so long.
Okay, let's dive into the perspective, and this one's pretty clear cut for me. You always have to put out there first. There could be the very low percentage scenario where Brandy's walking up to the house, she's approached or encounters someone who is unknown to us, a passerby. There's an interaction, something goes wrong, and she's killed. And that could be the reason why this case is still unsolved, because the person has no direct connection to Brandy or anyone else in that area for that matter. It could just be a transient, or it could be a neighbor, but just, again, no one who's ever been on the radar. But that scenario out of the way, because to me it's the most unlikely. I see three more specific scenarios, and one of them is kind of what Julie already laid out. But the first one being Mike finds out through friends, because Brandy had been telling other people that she's pregnant. So he creates this plan to set up this party for her at the old Emery house. He gives her the note. She goes up to the house. She meets him there. Maybe he's there by himself. Maybe he's there with a friend. They spend some time together, smoke some cigarettes, and then he kills her out of fear because she's pregnant and he doesn't want to have the baby. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two is that Brandy goes to the old Emery house knowing that nobody's going to be there. She plans on bringing this Post-it note down to Mike's house, leaving it there, and then having him meet her at the old John Emery house. So she goes down, she leaves the Post-it note. Mike knows why she wants him to come up to the house, so he grabs a gun and he goes up by himself or with a friend, and they maybe spend some time there, and then they kill her. The final scenario, which is probably the most likely, could have gone down a couple different ways, even though it involves the same players. So what I mean by that is, in my opinion, more than likely, Brandy went there and she knew there was no party. Even though she told Lydia that she was given this note, it's also possible that she wrote it herself and was just lying to Lydia. So she goes up to the old Emery house, knowing that Mike's not going to be there, but she wants him to come up and join her, so she makes her way down to Mike's house. And once she gets there, either she's met by Jamie, she's met by Mike, she's met by Mike and a friend, but something doesn't go well. Maybe they're smoking cigarettes for a little while, they're having some fun or talking, but something goes wrong. And while they're still at Mike's home, she's shot to death. Well, they can't leave her there. It's going to obviously come back to them, so they have to move her body. That would explain the trail marks that we talked about in the story that you have going from Jamie's house or Mike's house to the old John Emery house. That would explain that. It would also explain why the hunters originally found Brandy's purse and shoe outside of the house, not in the cellar. Those items were most likely with her at Mike's house, and then when they were transporting her body and her belongings, those items fell off along the way. And you might say, well, why wouldn't they put them downstairs with her? Listen, if you know you're going to be potentially connected to a murder, you're going to try to get out of there as fast as possible. And they may have missed it, or they may have said, screw it, just leave it there, no big deal. But that's really the only explanation for why her belongings would be outside while she was inside in the basement. And as far as the cigarettes are concerned, to me, that also suggests that she was somewhere else, at least for a brief period of time, unless all those cigarette butts were found in the basement and the police just haven't revealed that information. So where does that leave us in this case? Well, Mike's still out there. He could still be charged with murder. And as we heard from Julie, there is a potential witness who would possibly come forward with information if they knew they couldn't be charged with a crime as well. I think at this point, if a prosecutor who's involved with this case is listening, you have to take the chance. Even if you find out that this second individual assisted in the covering up of the murder, you want to get the main person. And if that allows you to at least hold someone accountable for Brandy's death, then it's worth it. But I will say this, if more than one person knows, then it's no longer a secret. So if this individual has information that could help this case, maybe someone else does as well. And maybe that person is listening or watching this video right now. So anyone with information is asked to call the Johnston County Sheriff's Crime Tips Hotline at 479-705-8477. A childhood friend of Brandy's is also offering a $5,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction of Brandy's murder. Lastly, I want to thank Julie for being a part of this episode. It's always great to have a family member or friend of the victim involved because it gives you that firsthand perspective. And I really think it adds a whole different dimension for the listeners and viewers because they're getting to hear real raw emotion from people who have been directly affected by these losses. I can tell the story, but there's no way to deliver the information with the same passion and emotion that the people who have been directly affected by these tragedies can. So thank you again, Julie, not only for this, but also your drive and determination to find answers for Brandy, Jerry, and the rest of her family. They deserve it. We're going to be following this case now. We're joining the fight with you, and hopefully we get some answers really soon. That's going to do it for me, guys. Everyone stay safe out there. I'll see you next week.